I'm Tim.
Hey, I'm Bob.
And tonight we're breaking out our mint condition first issue of Creepshow from 1982.
Jolting tales of horror. Creepshow. From the author of Carrie, The Shining, and Cujo. And the creator of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. You'll scream at ghastly ghouls. Cringe at weird kids. And shiver at the doings of evil doctors. Creepshow. The most fun you'll ever have being scared.
As a young boy plots his revenge against his abusive dad for throwing out his horror comic, the confiscated issue offers 5 tales of terror. The moldering patriarch of a crime family avenges himself on his descendants who profited from his murder. A fallen meteorite unleashes a vegetable spore that grows on everything around it, including the backwoods rube who discovered it. A jealous husband turns a day at the beach into a nightmare for his unfaithful wife and her lover. A henpecked professor hopes a fearsome monster forgotten beneath a college crawl space may fix his marital problems. And a cruel germophobic tycoon tries to fend off an invading army of cockroaches. As usual, we'll be discussing Creepshow in detail, so if you haven't seen the movie and want to remain unspoiled, we highly recommend you watch the movie before listening to the rest of this episode. Okay, what's your history with this movie, first viewing it and all?
I think I probably saw it before I knew what it was, if that makes any sense. The cockroach thing is sort of burned in there. So I probably saw that or one of the other parts very, very young. I feel strongly as though I probably saw this on, like, a making-of thing or, like, a montage of history of horror stuff, and you would say, okay, yeah, this is that. You know, if you're a horror fan, you know, you hear about Creepshow, especially when Tales from the Crypt finally hit, and someone finally made one of these EC anthology things that people went to see and made money, and then all of the others suddenly got popular again. And then, you know, Creepshow was always like, oh, you got to see Creepshow. That's the best one of these. And which I think it pretty much is. I mean, it's probably the best version anyone's done of this.
I'm a little torn between this and the 1970s Tales from the Crypt. I do love that movie.
That is a good one.
But this is one of the strongest, definitely.
Yeah. This is one of those ones that once October would hit, this would just be on all the time.
I remember it was a staple on HBO late nights a lot,
Yeah, HBO, because it worked. It's a really TV-friendly one of these because the stories are all spaced about ready for television. You don't have to cut the middle of the story. It's like, nope, it's the end. Now here's the commercial. It kind of makes for a really good broadcast TV thing. So I probably saw it there. And I almost want to say that I maybe saw 2 before 1 in complete, which is not a good idea. But it's not the best one.
No, it's got some strong points, but it's definitely not as solid as this one.
Yeah, it's better than the third one that they made. Like
the disavowed one?
Yeah, the one that's not real.
Yeah. For me, I have a weird history with this one. There are 2 things in my childhood that utterly traumatized me for many, many years. One was Michael Jackson's Thriller. I couldn't watch MTV for like a year and a half after that goddamn thing.
Oh, too bad that was a good year.
I know. And the other one was this. I remember this just being around a lot in my childhood. And actually, before seeing the movie, I remember reading the Bernie Wrightson illustrated graphic novel that they put out to tie in with this. And it's a direct translation of the movie, pretty much. You can still find it on eBay. It's really gorgeous. And I just remember it often in my dad's house being on, and just I'd run into another room, throw my hands over my ears. I couldn't even listen to any of it. When I finally did see it, I couldn't watch the Crate one, couldn't watch the Bug one. And it's funny because now looking, I don't see exactly why the other ones are just as gruesome and creepy as the latter 2. It's funny because if I were to see this for the first time today, I'd probably think, oh, it's goofy. It's a fun, campy little horror movie. I don't know if it would have the power it has over me. I mean, just thinking about it in normal broad daylight, I get that fear. I get the little bit of the creeps, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it still works. So this is both going to be a film discussion and kind of a therapy session for me. So.
Yeah, all right, cool.
So what are your thoughts on horror comics? I mean, did you have a lot of history of reading them? Or
I had a somewhat sheltered childhood, at least at first. I was a firstborn, so I was the practice kid. Horror comics were not a thing that I was aware of. Like, I was aware that Tales from the Crypt was a TV show. I probably didn't know the history of the name and EC Comics and all of this until later on. And by then, they were reprinting them. I think in the 80s, the reprints were pretty common for...
Well, especially in the 90s after the TV show, they actually put them out in these really nice glossy editions. And that's kind of how I came into it after the show, of becoming interested in, I'll read the originals.
Right.
And it's funny, reading them, they are great, but once you realize the formula, they do kind of click into that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a really... an interesting morality. Here's a particular person, they commit some transgression, some bad thing, some ironic thing comes back to punish them, repeat. And just pretty much you change the nature of the bad thing they did and the nature of what happens to them.
Right.
And you can just keep going and going and going with that.
Yeah, there's two basic EC comic story. There's that, and something unfortunate happens to an innocent who should have known better. Now, granted, before either of us were born, this had come and gone. So the history of that, I don't find out until much later. But, especially after seeing Creepshow, wait a minute. Comic books are about, like, superheroes, or occasionally cats that dislike a certain day of the week. Okay, this is a thing that happened. I had already clued in on the idea that most of the great filmmakers of my youth, were engaged in the practice of selling their childhood back to me, via George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. I didn't know the various things being referenced, but I could always tell, okay, that's something that these guys are all my dad's age. These are something that they were into when they were young, and now they're making movies about it. So eventually, the tumblers roll over my head. I said, okay, so apparently they used to make comic books out of horror movies. All right, this must have been a thing at one point.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit of basic info about the movie. It was released through Warner Brothers on November 12th, 1982. Missed October. That's kind of a surprise. It had opened against They Call Me Bruce and White Dog. It was shot for a budget of $8 million and managed up grossing about $21 million. It was Warner Brothers' highest grossing horror film that year and one of Romero's biggest hits. At least one of the biggest hits that he actually saw some money from, as opposed to Night of the Living Dead. Just a note, because this is an anthology movie, we're going to be changing the format of this episode a little bit. We're going to discuss the crew and then go story by story on this one rather than run through the entire cast. So let's talk about the crew. First off, of course, is George Romero. This was actually pretty early in the history of his Laurel Group company that he formed with Richard Rubenstein. They had done Martin, Dawn of the Dead, and were coming off of Night Riders, which unfortunately wasn't much of a hit.
I like that movie.
Oh, so do I. It's great. And definitely a nice change of pace for him. This one is too, in a way. It's a bit of an outlier, at least superficially, in that with most of Romero's movies, there is some type of social commentary going on. There's themes of revolution or collapse of social systems and social traditions. But this one, at least on the surface, feels a lot more like Romero just having a good time.
Yeah, there's character depth, but there's not a lot of metaphor going on in Creepshow. Like the thing in the crate. There's a version of that story stretched out to feature length where that's like the id of the imagination, and is anyone really killing anyone, or is this just a metaphor for things they'd like to do? But like in the comics movie, it's like, no, there's a Yeti in the box. It kills people. That's fucking it. Stop thinking about it.
Well, there's so little time in these stories, they kind of have to rely on archetypes to some degree. And I think that's part of why the film is constructed the way it is. It's like, it's very broad, like, yes, you immediately know what kind of person this is. You see Adrienne Barbeau, you know exactly who she is. And it works great on that level. Although I will say, watching it again, a couple social ideas kind of creep around the margin, so to speak. And we'll get into that as we go on with the different stories. And the writer, of course, is Stephen King. Romero and King, by this point, were both pretty well known as, masters of horror. And they had met with a focus on Romero possibly directing a film version of Salem's Lot. They figured, because he had just come off of Martin, he did a vampire movie. This guy wrote a vampire book. You guys get together, make a vampire movie. We'll make a ton of money.
Yeah.
It didn't quite work out. That eventually, of course, went to TV and Tobe Hooper. And then Romero became really interested in making a film of The Stand, and King wanted to. He had a screenplay ready to go. And they realized that there was no way they'd be able to afford the budget for that movie because it's such a huge scale, unless they did something to prove they could make some money and get a studio to back it. So they came up with the idea of, let's do an original one. And Romero decided he wanted to do an anthology. And I guess his original idea was each story would be almost like a little chapter in the history of horror films. You do a black and white one, you do a widescreen one, you do a 3D one, different aspect ratios, different styles completely. And that got scaled down. And King was the one who came up with the idea of, hey, we both like horror comics. Let's do a horror comic movie. And it's a shame. Romero kept getting attached to other King properties and projects that never quite worked. He was going to direct Pet Sematary, and that didn't happen. He was going to direct The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon and Gerald's Game, and those... Recently, he commented on how he just couldn't get financing for that. Creepshow 2 and I think The Dark Half are some of the only ones he's actually gotten the chance to go back and do more King stuff.
God, that's a shame.
I know. Especially him doing Pet Sematary, that would have been amazing. Mary Lambert's movie, not bad. Romero's would have been incredible, I think. Something else I've noticed watching this is King's dialogue. A lot of it works great on the written page. When spoken aloud, it's really tough to get it right. I think a lot of actors feel like they can't help but kind of ham it up a little bit when saying it because a lot of it is very broad and it doesn't have a lot of subtlety a lot of the time.
No, not his strong suit.
Yeah.
Sometimes though he can do it.
He can, but again, I think what works well in prose just doesn't always work well when spoken aloud.
Right.
The director of photography for the movie was the aptly named Michael Gornick. Gornick also shot Romero's films Martin, Dawn of the Dead, Night Riders, and Day of the Dead. He'd actually move up to director for Creepshow 2 and did several episodes of Stephen King's Golden Years, which, man, I wish that show had caught on. That was a really cool little show.
Yeah.
Gornick's style in this one is a marked difference from all of his other Romero movies, which are a little bit more conventional and pretty much, I don't want to say flat, but very direct.
Yeah.
And here, of course, they really go for the comic book visual style. I mean, with the wild colors and the cutaways to people in comic book frames with crazy lighting behind their heads. It's probably Romero's most distinctive-looking movie as a result.
Yeah, I love the way this looks. I really do. I like all the gels on everything, the comic book panel thing, which, now everyone and their aunt can do with, Premiere. This is, the easiest thing in the world to do. At the time, you look at this and it's like, oh, wow, there's 2 exposures there. That looks so fucking expensive. It never looks real, and it's never supposed to, and it's there are a few movies in this era that tried to do this, and this is really one of the only ones where it looks good. It looks like a cartoon, but in a good way.
Yeah, I keep thinking of, I hate to bring it up, Ang Lee's Hulk, where he tried to do a lot of the comic book framing, and it really didn't work for me in that one, because it didn't feel as motivated. Here, it's really quick, there's a turn of a page, there's a caption, there's a thought bubble, and then we move back into the story.
Right.
Yeah, the use of light, really alien colors in certain shock scenes, like when Nathan rises from the dead in Father's Day and all of a sudden it goes red and blue. It has like the 3D colors going on it.
Yeah.
Or the way they use the green lighting to imply the weed growing on Stephen King in his story. Or I noticed it's a little more subtle when Hal Holbrook is cleaning up the lab in Crate and all of a sudden this red light starts to glow on the side of his face.
Yeah.
And they match that lighting with Adrienne Barbeau in her kitchen reading the note.
Yeah, and it's practical, too, which you didn't see a lot of this in American movies of the time. This was really big in Hong Kong movies, where they would use lighting in lieu of optical effects. So, it's like, okay, something's happening to this guy, put a really bright spot on him. Or, like The Business when Ted Danson's underwater, and, there's an orange, glow behind his head that... If you saw that in a thing today, you'd assume that was CGI.
Because it probably would be, yeah.
It would be, but it's also a really good, and it's a subtle lighting effect. And you look at it, it's like, wow, that probably took, hours to set up.
I think nowadays you'd see this with a lot of digital grading, which instead you do the whole frame or portions of the frame, and it doesn't have the same effect as putting a weird gel light right next to somebody's head and letting it slowly fade up. Yeah.
Suspiria is probably the king of that effect.
Argento movies, there's quite a few in Argento's stuff, which considering that Romero had just worked with him on Dawn of the Dead, I wonder if some of that bled through. Supposedly, lab technicians had to be repeatedly encouraged not to color correct the footage because it kept coming in and they kept thinking it was a mistake. According to Michael Gornick, whenever it'd just be a static shot of a landscape without any weird color thing, they were relieved, finally, we can put it back to normal. Also, the use of canted angles in certain scenes. Gornick doesn't go crazy with it, just here and there to enhance the mood a little bit. And I noticed a lot of split diopter lenses, too. Again, when Nathan comes up from the grave and just the hand is in the foreground and Viveca Lenford's is still in focus in the background.
Yeah.
I think that's really good for keeping that particular type of comic book framing where something is really close and something is really far, but both are in focus.
And it's all really deliberately framed, like it would be for a... Which I like when they do that anyway. I really despise the handheld camera for the most part.
I don't mind it if it's used correctly. It would never fit anywhere in here.
No, it would look bad.
Yeah, and there's no handheld in the movie whatsoever, as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
The editing of the movie was actually done by 4 different people. You had George Romero himself editing Something to Tide You Over, Pasquale Buba, fun name to say, who edited a whole bunch of Romero's movies, including Night Riders and Day of the Dead and The Dark Half, and Heat, the Michael Mann movie. He edited The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. Paul Hirsch, who edited Star Wars, Empire, and a whole bunch of great De Palma movies like Blowout and Mission Impossible, edited The Crate. And Michael Spolin edited Father's Day and They're Creeping Up on You, and I guess this is actually his only credit. And despite the different editors, somehow the film kind of feels consistent in its editing and pacing.
Yeah.
I did notice the different editors have different styles of doing scares.
Yeah.
Editing is really important when you're trying to do a jump scare on somebody. And going back to the hand coming out of the grave, the way it pauses for a second, just long enough for the audience to kind of orient themselves as to what's going on.
Yeah.
Or I think my favorite editing is probably in The Crate. There's a lot of great intercutting. That sequence where they're opening the crate and banging down on it to get the nails up and pulling them back out. And just the way it's cut fast back and forth, you don't want to open that. It just says ominous right there, just through technique.
This is taking too long for there to be anything good in the crate.
The way they hold long scenes of everybody under that crawl space, and you're just waiting. All right, when's it going to come out?
Yeah.
Any second now. The music was written and performed by John Harrison, who also served as the film's assistant director when the original assistant director quit. Harrison's greatest fame actually isn't as a musician or director, but from his bit appearance as the zombie who gets the screwdriver in the head from Dawn of the Dead. Apparently he says people still come up to him and say, hey, you're that guy. He'd also write the score for Day of the Dead and would go on to direct several episodes of Tales from the Dark Side, as well as the movie, and the sci-fi miniseries Dune, the one with William Hurt, which actually is pretty good.
Oh, good for him.
Romero had originally intended to follow the example he did in Night of the Living Dead and use library cues for the entire thing.
No one does that anymore.
I know. Well, maybe because, unfortunately, a lot of those library cues have been used in places where they're a little too recognizable. They use a couple here and you go, oh, that's Night of the Living Dead. Oh, wait, there's the tune from the end of Evil Dead. So Harrison suggested, hey, why don't I do a little music to bridge some of these library pieces together? And when the library music didn't quite work, Harrison just kept writing more and more music and performing it all on his synthesizer. And I think the score is a good 40 to 50% of why the movie is so scary for me.
Yeah.
It is a fantastic score.
It is.
It's kind of playful, but also just really ominous, and I like how he changes the style of it for each story.
And it's a synth score that's not trying to sound like a synth score, which you didn't get much back then, and you don't get at all today now, because now when you do a synth score, everyone tries to be John Carpenter, so it's a synth score.
Well, you have things like The Crate, where he just uses a piano for a lot of it. It's really quiet and slow building.
Yeah.
That great rising tension of Something to Tide You Over, where he actually takes, I didn't even realize this until it was pointed out to me, the song Camptown Races that Leslie Nielsen is singing, and uses that as kind of the basis for the theme as it gets creepier.
Yeah.
Or that weird atonal music he's using for the creeping up on you as the roaches are starting to crawl along.
Right.
Or even like the use of the children's choir in the beginning, which kind of reflects the little kid in the opening scene and how he's going to get revenge. The makeup effects are famously by Tom Savini. Of course, Savini and Romero have a great collaboration going back to Martin and proceeding through Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Monkey Shines, and Two Evil Eyes. Savini also acted in a lot of his movies, including Martin and Night Riders, and appears as a garbage man at the end of this movie. While a lot of his makeup effects work he's claimed was influenced by his time as a combat photographer in Vietnam, and he tries to make it realistic to align with what he had seen, it feels like that striving for realism is thrown a little bit out the window in this one, and quite appropriately so.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, you look at the scene where Fluffy, the big furry thing from the crate, attacks that college student and tears his throat out. It's so ridiculously cartoony.
Yeah, it looks like it's leaving a hand-shaped impression in his face.
It is, yeah.
It's really cool.
It looks like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon, but it fits. Savini also supposedly had a phobia about bugs, and while he was filming the last scene with E.G. Marshall's corpse, he actually went out to the fake corpse to just test it out and was touching it, and all of a sudden a bug crawled out in his hand, and he just doesn't remember what happened next. He was just outside of the room and freaking out.
Huh.
And he was not able to be in the room when they did the final effect of the roaches coming out. You can see the behind-the-scenes thing where he's on the other side of this pane of glass going, yeah, that looks great, fantastic. I really gained an appreciation of the use of sound in this movie. One thing I noticed in 3 of the stories, we have characters where their voices get processed in weird ways. The Nathan one is processed in this creepy voice where it sounds like he has dirt in his throat. It's really effective. Jordy, once he's turned into Weed Man there, it's the same thing. It almost sounds like there's something growing in his throat. With the Danson and Ross characters, when they come back after being drowned, they have this liquidy kind of timbre to their voice.
Yeah.
That particular vocal effect still creeps me out when I see it in other movies because of my association with this one. The fact they really play up the roach sound effect when they're crawling around, if you hear this noise whenever you see one on camera. And it, again, effectively gets under your skin. So let's get into the stories themselves. First, we have the wraparound story, where we have Tom Atkins, that horror icon from Night of the Creeps and Halloween 3. Joe King, later Joe Hill, the great horror author in his own right, who wrote Horns. And the story seems to be kind of Romero and King having revenge on sort of the Frederick Wortham mindset.
Yeah. Frederick Wortham was a child therapist in the 1950s. He became really fascinated with the idea of negative impacts of children's media, comic books specifically. He published the book Seduction of the Innocent, which was laser focused on the idea of the hyped up masculinity and femininity in superhero comics that he thought was damaging to the psychosexual development of children. You know, that you had these macho guys always saving women and women not dressed much. And unfortunately, he had to go before Congress and say, we need to do something about this. Congress ultimately turned out not to be interested in superheroes. They turned out to be much more interested in the horror comics, which were not made for kids, but they were comics, so yes, they were. And Congress got upset about that, because people would come home and they would, like in the movie, find their kids, and they decided something needed to be done. And nothing legal came of this, but the comics industry basically regulated itself to avoid having to deal with this in the future. And EC Comics, which was Bill Gaines' company, later of Mad Magazine, pretty much all of his comics got discontinued after this. So he was doing crime, suspense, horror, sex, whatever he would do.
Even his sci-fi stuff he wasn't able to do, yeah.
That's why the horror comic disappeared and why it was this foundational, formative thing for a whole generation of horror writers.
And Romero says he based the opening scene from something in his childhood where a lot of times his horror comics would get taken away and that he did have to keep them hidden somewhere if he wanted to read them. And the story seems to really focus on sort of the hypocrisy of that attitude, that you have this dad who's physically abusive, possibly an alcoholic, has adult magazines in his room, and that's perfectly fine. But no, this horror comic is clearly the problem and has to go.
Stan, don't you think you were, well, a little hard on him?
You see that crap? All that horror crap? Things coming out of crates and eating people? Dead people coming back to life? People turning into weeds, for Christ's sake?
Well, yes, I did, but I...
Well, you want them reading that stuff?
Well, no, but...
All right, then. I took care of it. That's why God made fathers, babe. That's why God made fathers.
You can tell Tom Atkins is evil. No mustache. See? It's all about the mustache.
The fact that we see the creeper, in the movie right away, and it's a scary-looking puppet, but we're not supposed to be afraid of it. Right. And we know this because the kid is not afraid of it. The kid's glad to see it. And it's waiting outside the window, and it's waiting out there. Like, the creeper is Puff the Magic Dragon in this context. It's like appearing like a Santa Claus figure, that the kid is sad, and then things at the window, and it's like, it's okay. I got this. That's probably the thing that I look at and say, okay, of everything in this movie that is supposed to be about, Romero and King and probably a lot of the other people working on this, living out, a childhood thing, that feels like the apotheosis of what this is supposed to be about. Yes, folks, apotheosis. That's right. That's right.
We're getting wordy here.
Damn right. Now watch someone point out that I probably didn't use the right word there.
And that does get into a weird reflexive thing that the creeper is a character in the comic book. He's read the comic book. The character is now outside his window. By the end of the movie, this kid is the cover of issue 2.
Right.
And we just saw issue 1. It's this weird idea of somehow he is entered into the comic book world in a strange way. The first story proper is Father's Day with Viveka Lenford's Carrie Nye and Ed Harris. The story kind of presents the classic EC Comics, zombie coming out of the grave to get its revenge. I will say, and this is where some of the morality of the horror comics come in, I feel like the murdered party in this one, the grandfather who rises from the dead, kind of had it coming.
Yeah, he's kind of a bastard.
You look at Linford's character, Aunt Bedelia, who a lot of the characters are very arch in this movie, and yet you have that scene where she is on the grave and giving this long, rambling, half-drunk monologue of guilt and anger about basically how he screwed up their family and how he hurt her, not only by murdering her boyfriend, which is bad enough as it is, but also just the constant abuse that he gave her. And it's an actual real moment. There's some genuine pathos there. Not like a lot of the movie, which is pitched a little bit more arch.
Shouldn't have killed Peter, He was a man, right? A real man. See? Everything I wanted, he wanted for me. You stupid bastard. You screwed it all up. You screwed up my mother. You screwed me up. You got me so mad. Drove me crazy. I want my cake, Bedelia! You bitch! You called me a bitch!
Supposedly Linford's channeled feelings regarding her father and her ex-husband while shooting the scene, and deviate a lot from the screenplay, which I guess annoyed Stephen King, who of course wanted the dialogue just so, but I think it works better for that way, which, as we discussed, a lot of King's dialogue doesn't totally work.
Little broad, little on the broad side.
I also have to say that moment of him coming out of the grave still packs a punch for me. I know it's coming, and yet when that burst of music and the hand rips up, I still jump.
Yeah, it's really well timed.
So let's talk about the Nathan Zombie. It is a really good zombie.
It is. I feel like this is like the second best attempt someone made at doing the EC Comics were kind of famous for their zombies because they don't really look like decayed human beings for the most part. They seem to have gained mass.
Certainly in this case, yeah.
They really kind of take the idea that the skin hugs the skull and looks scary and run with it. It's got the skin folding over the mouth in places where skin does not actually cover the mouth. And, it's got the worms coming out of it. And it looks like a skeleton full of earth walking around as opposed to like a decomposing... Like, this guy's been dead a while.
Yeah.
And not buried well.
And considering when we see him alive in the movie, he's kind of this smaller old man.
Yeah.
He looks pretty large when we see him in zombie form.
Other than the oil monster in Return of the Living Dead, this is the best version of getting that look on screen.
Nathan was played by John Amplas, who previously starred as the title character in Martin, and I guess he was fine playing the character. The one thing he wouldn't do is the close-ups when we see actual maggots on the face. He refused to get in the suit for that one.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
And had to get somebody else to do it. And finally, we come to the real scary question. What the hell is with Ed Harris's dancing in this movie?
He's putting in the effort, man.
He is.
He's putting in the effort. This is, there's no way to look good doing that. That whole era of dance was created specifically to embarrass white people. That's the only reason that exists. And Ed Harris is whiter than most.
He jumps into it with gusto, though. He has no shame. He just does it, and I give him credit for that. Of course, he had worked previously with Romero on Knight Riders, where he played King Billy, the lead role.
Yeah.
And right after this, he'd go on to The Right Stuff, and from there on, he's a star.
Ed Harris is a presence you want in something like this because no matter what he's in, if he says it, you believe it.
Absolutely.
If he's, if he is scared of the zombie, it's like, well, I don't know. It kind of looks like a guy wearing, like, thrift store clothes to me, but Ed Harris is scared. I believe it. That guy wouldn't fuck with me. That's an honest guy.
His reaction when the headstone starts moving, where it's not a fear thing, it's like I cannot move. If I move, it's going to fall on me. Yeah. Staring at it is really good.
What are my options here?
I'll climb this way. Corpse, not good. And it's not until he sees the zombie over him that he kind of realizes, oh, okay.
Well, and it's great misdirection, too. That's what I don't know if it's intentional. You talked about the fact that this one doesn't have really like a clean moral slate like a lot of the EC ones do, where, if you deserve it, you're going to get it.
Right.
Or, alternately, you don't deserve it and you get it and we're supposed to feel bad. There's not a lot of nuance. It's not what they were for.
Right.
Whereas in this one, it's like, okay, here's the thing coming back from the dead for revenge, but, this guy was a bastard, and, most of these people, I'm like, they're not, like, great people, but they didn't do anything that wrong. The guy's a bastard.
Well, because he's the outsider, and I love the subtle things in his performance that show it. When he steps outside for a cigarette and does that head shake, like, I can't deal with these people. The rest of the family, because they all conspired to cover up the murder, basically for money, they kind of have it coming in the EC moral center. Bedelia, I still say no, because she acted less out of a mercenary desire than more revenge that she definitely deserved.
But whether or not it's intentional, I think it sets up the rest of the movie pretty well in terms of these are really short stories. There's not a lot of twists to them. They are very basic. Here's what's going to happen. Now watch it happen.
Yeah.
Stories. But in the case of this one, like if you watch this and don't know that, if you've never seen this movie before, the automatic assumption is you look at this and say, okay, this is George Romero and Stephen King. These are two guys from New England. This is a fuck you to, the Connecticut royal family type people, right down to the fact that the old man, what was he? A bootlegger.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what do you know? I wonder who we're supposed to think of when thinking of this decaying New England aristocratic family. And then Ed Harris is there, and he's just a little blonder and a little tanner than everyone else, and he's worn a flannel shirt to a fancy party, as though wherever the hell he's from, this is a nice shirt. And he's got like the big, it's not a State of Texas belt buckle, but it might as well be. He's like the semi-well-to-do working class guy who's come home to meet the rich girlfriend's family. In any other version of this story, he's the good guy who makes it at least partway to the end, if for no other reason than who else are they going to explain shit that all of them already know to advance the story. But instead, no, he gets whacked right the fuck off the bat, second guy, and it's like, oh, well, wait a minute, that was obviously the good guy. So now where are we? I don't know what I'm saying. We're off kilter. We're adrift, and this is the movie's nice signal. Just so you know, you're going to predict the shit out of this movie. Fine, it's what we're doing. We're still going to fuck you. We're still going to find a way.
Yeah, in any movie, it feels like him meeting Nathan would be the climax of the story. Instead, the big twist is, okay, when he gets his cake that he wants, what's the cake going to be?
Right.
And as for the bootlegger thing, there is the question of when Bedelia spills her whiskey on the grave, is that what revives him? Is it like a Finnegan's Wake kind of turn? And that's what finally brings him back. In which case, watch out for your liquor.
Yeah.
One other little trivia note, the owner of the estate that they filmed all of the cemetery scenes on when they dug the big hole for John Amplas to crawl out in the Nathan suit, the owner of the house actually ended up using that hole to bury his dog who died during the filming of the movie, which is sad and also slightly creepy.
Yeah. Thanks, Captain Bringdown.
Let's move on to the second story, the funny story, the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill. As a kid, I was always like, after Father's Day, which would creep me out, this was like, oh, I can relax. It's the funny story. It's okay. This was kind of my first experience with really what body horror is, you know?
Yeah.
And the more I think about it now, it's just, it's very unpleasant.
Yeah. For those of you playing along at home who have not watched the movie yet, this is the one where Stephen King, as a hayseed farmer, finds a meteor, and when he touches it, it gradually turns him and everything else into the surrounding area into a plant.
It's a nice sort of mix of The Color Out of Space, the H.P. Lovecraft story. Meteor lands, screws up this family in all sorts of gruesome ways on a farm, and a little bit of The Blob. That opening scene where he pokes at the meteor, that's the old man poking the meteorite in the blob. And again, like the previous story, it doesn't feel like Jordy really deserves the fate he gets in this one. I mean, he's an idiot, but he's not a really bad guy.
Yeah, he seems like a pretty innocent guy. I mean, you know, and this is exactly the movie where if he had like bodies in the basement, we'd know. You know, he just seems like this is a story about a guy who's pretty much seems to have had a really dog shit life, that maybe he's mercifully too dumb to realize how dog shit it is. You know, we see the house in the movie, he's not doing well, and then meets an end that no one would deserve.
Absolutely. The only bit of luck he has, as he said in the story, is that he finds the shotgun and gets it in front of his face, and then it happens to be loaded.
Yeah.
That's pretty grim. And as for King's performance, apparently the broadness of it was due to George Romero telling him, play it like Wile E. Coyote just walked off a cliff and is just realizing he's about to fall. Yeah. And he pretty much hits that level.
Gory, don't it itch? Well, that's Verrill luck, all right. Always in, always bad.
That's good. That's a nice version. I mean, I'll take them at their word, sure, but, you know, it's 1982, it's Stephen King. I look at this and I kind of think, oh, so that's what happens after a wheelbarrow full of cocaine. No judgments here. You know, but I mean, this was not long until Maximum Overdrive, which, according to him, he doesn't remember making, and he directed that film.
Actor, director? No. Writer. Writer's good. Yeah. Writer's fine.
And even that, maybe stay in the books. Great story man, hell of a novelist, the great popular novelist of the 20th century, probably.
His nonfiction stuff is fantastic.
Yeah, he's
On Writing is one of my all-time favorite books.
Really, really good, not necessarily a screenwriter, which is fine.
The casting of Bingo O'Malley as every other character in the story. This is, again, there's a lot of stories with not huge casts in this one. This is interesting. He plays the professor from the Department of Meteors, the doctor, and the dad. It's interesting when you realize that the first two characters are imaginary. They're in Geordy's head, and his dad is the only one he'd actually know. So it seems like Geordy views every authority figure as his dad, or a variation of his dad.
The economical character storytelling. We get a sense of what kind of life Geordy must have had, and, you know, how someone winds up like this, and, okay, this is, you know, only child, probably had not a great father, you know, on the farm. All of this is told economically through the visuals and the set design. All of his stuff is super old, so that when the dad finally shows up and he's got the Southern preacher thing happening, and there's, you know, the green hellfire thing, you know, behind him, I know everything about this guy from these scenes.
That his big solution when this happens is to find the bottle of alcohol that he has socked away somewhere, hidden away. That says a lot right there, too.
This is...
That he's terrified of the doctor, that he knows exactly what happens if he goes to the doctor. It's going to go horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah. Horror film with a bad dad thing going on. You never see that, so it's good to have that come in. It's a novel new twist.
King was in considerable discomfort when he filmed the movie. He was allergic to the makeup when it had to be glued on his face. Additionally, they tried to put contact lenses in that would make his eyes green, and they just could not get them in there comfortably. He also originally had a prosthetic for his tongue for the scene where he looks in the mirror and sees that his tongue is starting to grow, but once he wore it, he couldn't say any dialogue after that, so they just basically put some makeup on his tongue to discolor it. This is also the only story that implies that the end of the world might follow after the fade-out.
Yeah.
Fans of Stephen King might also notice the reference to Castle Rock on the road sign in the last shot, which would apparently change a lot of the continuity for his later Castle Rock stories.
There's some cadet shit that'll fix that. that they'll just get that all handled.
Let's move right over to Something to Tide You Over, featuring Ted Danson. Right before he was about to start Cheers, he actually apparently talked to George Romero on the set and said, I got this thing coming up where I'm in a bar. I don't know if it's really going to work or not.
Yeah.
And Leslie Nielsen, of course. And... this is right when he's transitioning into comedy. He had just done Airplane, he had just done Police Squad, Naked Gun was a few years in the future, and this role kind of straddles the gulf. He can be extremely creepy and scary, often by underplaying it in the first half, where he's just this character who you really feel like could do something terrible any second.
Just a little too confident.
Yeah, and then as his plot for revenge is revealed bit by bit, he gets more campy and goofy and fun, and to the point where he's just cackling insane while he's watching them on the screen slowly drowning.
Yeah.
But I love the little touch where after that cackling scene, he kind of has this weird sort of come down where he suddenly straightens up and kind of realizes, what the hell am I doing? This, I don't know if it's supposed to be guilt or embarrassment of how elaborate this ridiculous thing he just did is, but it's an odd, tiny little touch that I get the sense Nielsen probably just added on his own, and it says a lot about his character.
Well, he always was a really good actor, and it's, if you were like looking at the story from outside, the story of Leslie Nielsen's career, you'd almost want to say it's like, oh man, that's too bad. He didn't get to be like a dramatic actor afterwards. But a lot of guys his age, that were dramatic actors of that fashion, who were not method actors. Their entire thing was being very square-jawed and confident and showing up and saying things in a very direct and serious way. That whole thing went away. And he's like the guy who got on the last lifeboat on the Titanic for that breed of male actor, of jumping in the boat of, they're going to need one of us to do the funny version of this, and it's going to be me.
Well, that's the funny thing. You look at him in Airplane, we had him and Lloyd Bridges and Robert Stack, and that was the joke, that these heavy dramatic actors are acting silly. And he kind of apparently realized, hey, that's where the future lies. Apparently, he was that silly. I mean, on the set, he had a fart machine with him. Anytime things were getting too serious, he'd set it off and start farting when they're out in public meeting people and such. There's even claims that in that last shot where he's going insane and laughing maniacally when the zombies have him cornered, he's actually laughing because he set off the fart machine. That made the crew laugh, and the crew laughing made him laugh in turn. And they just recorded it for that take.
It's remarkable to me that Danson and Nielsen are both on... The first half of this story is pretty much just these two guys, and Frank Drebin and Sam Malone are on screen opposite each other, and these are two actors who are both respectively kings in their separate generations of, if I'm standing in a scene, it is funny. Even if I'm not doing anything, the fact of me here, like it's a clown nose with legs,
Which, it's nice because modern audiences looking at this movie, it's okay if they look and go, oh, it's ridiculous, it's Leslie Nielsen, because that fits the tone of the movie so well.
Yeah.
The third member of the cast, again, only 3 cast members in this story, is Galen Ross, who worked with Romero on Dawn of the Dead. And I feel bad for her in that all of her scenes, she's either being hit with water, buried up to her neck in the sand, or wearing this incredibly heavy zombie makeup where it looks like she can't even see because her eyes are swollen shut.
Yeah. Really well-designed zombies, too.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, are they supposed to be zombies because they act like ghosts?
Well, that's the question, because we see the video feed. We never see them in the video. We see, like, smoke, but we never actually see them. Is that a case of them as ghosts saying, well, you got us on video when we were dying, we're not going to show up on your videos anymore, or are they ghosts? You could almost argue they're in Leslie Nielsen's head, that it's like some hidden guilt and it's manifest him this way, and that he's actually going to bury himself in the sand by the end of the story.
They also teleport across a door, so there is also that.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird extra zombie powers in this one.
Yeah, well, the Father's Day Nathan has like force powers, so there's a lot of. But they still had. This was '82. We hadn't locked down zombie rules yet. Zombie. They're living dead of some kind. Zombie, ghoul, ghost.
And in the Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror kind of rules, nothing is going to stand in the way of justice, no matter what. If it's a door or whatever, they're going to get a way around it.
Yeah.
There was a scene shot that might have sort of explained that, where the Ted Danson zombie ghost thing, his hand actually got cut off in the doorway when Leslie Nielsen is closing it, and then we would have seen a stop-motion version of the hand crawling up into the tub, and that's where they would have come out for the second part of the scene.
Yeah.
I don't think they really needed it. It works just as fine without it, but I guess they looked at the stop-motion and it didn't quite cut it.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds too elaborate.
The shot of Harry drowning, they actually accomplished that by putting Ted Danson in a big aquarium with the sand around his neck in the bottom. And they had somebody there with a regulator to stick into his mouth between takes, and Tom Savini on the outside with a sledgehammer, so in case there was trouble, he could get him out. I don't know if I'd trust Tom Savini with a sledgehammer.
I don't trust anybody with a sledgehammer. That's how Houdini died.
Yeah, especially when you're surrounded by glass. That just feels like that's asking for trouble.
That's credit to Danson.
Yeah, absolutely.
We think of him as one of those guys who's just kind of like the consummate TV star guy who you could imagine being pretty demanding. Actually, allegedly, a really cool guy, very open to self-parody, sometimes to his detriment, as it turns out. But
well, on the set of this, he was always joking around that apparently he and Galen Ross, when they were getting their makeup done, started doing all of their dialogue, practicing it, but doing it in like this southern redneck voice. And Savini and Michael Gornick were begging them to do one take on Romero as a joke in that voice, and they never did.
Yeah.
Apparently, he also tried to stay out of his daughter's line of sight when she was on the set because he was afraid he was going to scare her in this horrific zombie makeup. Apparently, when she finally did see him, she was just like, "Oh, hi, Dad," and walked away. When he was being drowned, when he's buried in the sand, he actually was buried a lot further up the beach, and they had a device with a ramp just pouring water on him that could pour multiple waves. Any shot from the back where you can see the water, it's actually just a little puppet head. But that still couldn't have been a pleasant experience.
Yeah, no, that's another one of those things where too much can go wrong. I mean, it's a low-budget production. There are not 6 insurance guys from Warner Brothers off screen waiting to save your ass in case something goes wrong. It's a George Romero movie. There's like, a skeleton crew out there on the beach getting a shot that they probably don't have permission to get. So, if you fuck up, you're done.
One other interesting note, the beach house that we keep seeing in the movie does not actually exist. It's all matte paintings.
Oh, wow.
Which I never realized for the longest time. It's really well done.
You know what I like? I like the zombie blood that leaks and is mostly water.
Yeah.
That really is something that sells the... It's like, okay, I'm not sure what's supposed to be going on with these guys. When they do like the waterlogged ghost thing today, they put a filter on it or something. But notice when it's like, they shoot them and a little bit of blood and also water comes out. It's a nice touch.
And it doesn't look like normal blood. It looks bluish and greenish like that. Like it's decayed somehow.
I'd like to see some of these guys on The Walking Dead. I think at some point they have to get near water.
They've done like mud zombies. I don't know if they've done... Well, they did like a bloated well zombie at one point. So
Yeah.
I also have to give huge credit to the moment where Danson realizes what's going on, when he's watching the video and Richard leans down and goes,
"There's a chance you can get out of this, Gary. The tide might even set you free. It depends on how long you keep it cool, how long you hold your breath, you see, Harry. The water's so cold, so salty. You're underneath, and you're holding your breath, and you're waiting for that wave that's covering you to go on back out so you can snatch a quick breath before the next wave comes in. You've got a chance, Harry. If you don't lose your head now, it looks like she's losing hers, doesn't it?
Oh, God, no!
Feel how hard your heart is beating, Harry? How fast? Now that's going to make it harder for you to hold your breath, isn't it?
and there's that realization of, oh, here it comes, that he's going to leave him here and let him drown.
Yeah.
The way Danson kind of acts that realization, the way the music swells there, it's perfect. It is a great, great moment.
It is. Ted Danson doing the talking directly to a video monitor thing, which was still novel then. I think this is one of the things that is like lost about that segment if you watch it today, is that would be so fucking easy to rig up now.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, you know, there's so much screen time devoted to making sure we understand just how much fucking effort this is taking to haul video cables from one end of the beach to the other, because there's no such thing as you know, wireless video yet. And just the idea of guys who are not basement ham radio guys having really, really well kitted out video stuff was such a new thing then. You know, it's practically like, it's like, you know, maybe before you fuck this guy's wife, you should have checked and made sure that he wasn't a Bond villain. Jesus Christ.
There's that moment where he's going through his videotapes. What else is on those videos?
Yeah.
What else has he done to people? How many times has he pulled this off? Yeah. Let's move on to The Crate. I think this one might be my favorite.
I would say so. I think this is the one I think of when I think of Creepshow.
Yeah, this is probably the strongest story, I think partially because it is based again on a previously published short story that King wrote. It feels a little more thought out.
Yeah.
It feels like the characters, all the details of what happens in it have been planned out a little bit more meticulously. There's a little less of this kind of let's throw it at the wall and people buy it because it's a horror movie kind of mentality behind it. And it has a great cast. You have Hal Holbrook for horror movies, was previously in The Fog and also appeared in Wall Street and is famous for playing Mark Twain in Mark Twain Tonight. Fritz Weaver from Failsafe and one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes, The Obsolete Man. That was a really good one. And most famously, Adrienne Barbeau as the most evil woman on the planet. And it's funny because for years I could not look at Adrienne Barbeau without associating her with this character. And she's supposedly the nicest person.
Yeah.
But man, she really... Again, it's a complete cartoon, but she bites into it with gusto.
Yeah. Well, and she does a really good job of making you despise, because it's not like she's Cruella de Vil. You know, she's not skinning puppies or something. You know, she's just kind of a bitch. And basically, her grand sin of this movie is being unpleasant social company for a guy who doesn't seem to deserve this hassle. But it's a great turn of that because it's, again, really good economical storytelling. She shows up in that scene and we know, she does her routine and he looks, at his shoes and we know everything about what has been going on.
And if Dex Stanley hadn't had his teeth capped, he'd have been out on his ass years ago.
Really well, my
So when Parker told me that I was out of line, I told him he ought to get laid. I mean, Parker, I said, if you just have your ashes hauled, you wouldn't have to spend all this time playing Emily Vanderbilt. Or Emily Van Buren. Or whoever that etiquette crotch is.
Excuse me?
The only thing we don't know is how the hell this happened in the first place.
I could imagine him being the kind of guy who's terrible with women and married the first person who actually let him into her bed.
Right.
And this is the result. And she probably looked at him and saw, all right, this guy's a professor. He's going somewhere.
Right, yeah.
He's my ticket.
Yeah.
And when it didn't turn out that way, she grew bitter, and this was the result. She always seems to be in a constant state of inebriation. She always feels like she's just had a few. Or the subtle touch of costuming where she's going to her class, supposedly, but she looks like she's dressed for something else entirely different.
At like fucking midnight.
Yeah. The story supposedly came from a real incident that happened to King at the University of Maine, where they actually did find a crate under a stairwell that was like 100 years old, and nobody knew what was in it, and everyone assumed, it's probably just magazines or something. I don't know if they ever opened it and found some bloodthirsty Tasmanian devil creature, but...
It's supposed to be a Yeti, right? It says Arctic expedition. It's
never really clear. In the original story, we don't even see it very much. I mean, even in the story, it's described very loosely as just something with a bullet-shaped head. You just see a kind of a patch of fur and 6 arms. And that's really it. And then the one criticism I'd have this, I think we should see a bit less of the creature. I think we see it a little too much. Like just the shot of the eyes when it's in the crate and the claws, I think would have been enough.
I don't know. I think by this point, especially because it's not a subtle movie, and I think they've kind of done movies where we see a lot of the waterlogged zombies, we see enough of Nathan. In this one especially, in terms of this one, when you've got a movie where you're already doing stuff like, comic book panel balloons and cartoon cockroaches swarming in to form a frame and backlit effects behind, like the Spidey sense effects behind people's head and all things, I think if you decided to go subtle now, unless you're making a story about it, if it's the crate that eats people, like if there's a black hole in the crate or something, okay, different story, but, if you're going to do the thing where, okay, there's some kind of horrible thing in the crate, I think we have to see it. We probably see it one more time than we need to.
I think mostly whenever we see the big close-up of it, because it opens its mouth, and it's supposed to be drooling, and it looks more like it's spitting water at us. They're putting so much drool out of it. It gets a little bit much.
But it at least it does look like it's like, okay, so how do you get ripped apart? Oh, it's basically made of razor blades. All right, okay, I get it. When we finally see it is great because... it's one of those, they've hidden it for so long. We've seen the eyes, we've seen the hands, we've seen the fingers. And then finally, we get a cut, and it's a cut that stays on it, and it feels like it's going to be a slow shot, like a quick, like that. And it's like, nope, there it is. There's the monster. Rah! Mouth opens. And it's like, okay, we've seen it. Okay, there's the monster.
I do love the moment where he actually eats Wilma, and it's like holding her, but looking at the Hal Holbrook character like, all right, what do I do? And she's screaming. He kind of roars at Hal Holbrook and then goes, she's screaming, I'm going to shut her up, and eats her face.
Yeah.
I also love with the structure of this one, most of these ones, you can kind of see where they're going. Okay, somebody's killed. They're going to come back from the dead, get revenge. Going into this one for the first time, you have really no idea where it's going. It's just, you have this unpleasant woman here. You have this box. We have no idea what's in the box.
Yeah.
So I kind of wish I could go back to seeing it for the first time and pondering, all right, what's going to happen when they open this thing? We know it's going to be something bad, and I love that we never really find out exactly what it is. Arctic Expedition is pretty much the only clue we get.
Yeah.
The monster itself, which was nicknamed Fluffy in the set, is actually the first all-out monster that Tom Savini created. Mostly to this point, it had been like Jason and zombies and splatter effects and stuff like that. He had never really done a monster, so he really got into making this one look amazing. And I think it does. I just think that it would have been better to show a little less.
I like that it specifically looks like an ape. For some reason, this one, like, I know that anytime Stephen King stories get slightly otherworldly, it becomes like, oh, this is King doing Lovecraft. This is one that really feels like it, with the college setting and the thing in the box that you don't want to let out of the box.
Yeah.
And also it feels, even though it's contemporary, it feels like a period horror story, and I don't know if it would without it being an ape, because it feels like something that would come from that era where an ape was interesting enough that that's a monster. When it was like when we were still bringing back orangutans with deformities from Africa and saying, what is it? Is it man? Is it beast? My God. It held a stick, I tell you.
This creature, I almost think if you saw it in full light, it would look like a suit that Ray Crash Corrigan would have worn in like a Flash Gordon episode or something. Yeah. I also really like the interplay between Hal Holbrook and Fritz Weaver. You do get this sense of this friendship that's been kind of soured by this woman in between them. There's that great moment where they're on the porch of the building, and Weaver's about to say something like, I can't take much more of this, or I swear if this keeps going this way, and he's cut off. And you almost feel like their friendship is almost at its breaking point.
Yeah.
And yet in that last scene, they are both willing to cover up this sort of a crime. They didn't really, like they both of them point out, neither of them has actually ever committed a crime in this case. But
he does beat up his wife at the end. He's culpable enough at the end of this. She doesn't go under the stairs. He does force her under the stairs.
Right, that's valid.
There's a point where it's like, well, you could arrest the Romans if that had been a crime. It's like, well, technically the lion ate them, but it's like, no, you put them in with the lion. You did that shit.
Fair point.
It's weird. The fact that he wants to feed her to a Yeti is somehow less bad than when he shakes her. It's way more sympathetic than I think anything would be today to the fact that this guy doesn't just fucking leave. Or, the other, he lies. The big lie of the story to get her down there is, well, I think my friend raped and possibly beat up one of his students, and I need your help covering this up. And we see in the movie that this is at least within the realm of possibility. At the very least, he is fucking his students, or trying to.
Well, it's hard to say. There's the implication that it could be that way, but it's tough to say. But with that lie, though, I think it's more he tells the lie that he knows is going to get her down there. That you can see the delight in her face that this stuffy friend of his has gone and done something really terrible that could destroy his career, and she could have a part in destroying that career. Maybe.
Right.
But I also love that last scene at the chessboard.
So what about you, Dexter? What are you going to say?
Nothing. Thanks. Thank you, Dexter.
Oh, no need to thank me. After all, what are friends for? I haven't done anything to anybody.
Neither have I.
What if I'd waked up before you got here and called the police?
You didn't.
There's that implication of I might have had to do something to take care of the situation if it come to that.
Yeah.
There's a really subtle undercurrent of menace in that last moment, which I think is really interesting.
This is a guy who took the long way around to being a multiple murderer.
A couple other interesting notes of it. The couple at the party that are introduced as Richard and Tabitha is a reference to Stephen King's pseudonym Richard Bachman and his wife Tabitha King. And Tabitha is actually played by Romero's then-wife and producing partner Christine Forrest.
Oh, hey.
Supposedly, King met her on the set and liked her name and named Christine the car after her.
Oh.
Also, there's a moment cut from the very last shot where the creature breaks out of the crate and we see the bubbles coming up.
Yeah.
Originally, it would have gone on a couple seconds more and we would have seen Wilma's half-eaten face float to the surface. I've seen pictures of the effect and it's better cut. It doesn't quite work.
Yeah, it's a little much there. It's the thing is out of the crate is enough. Although we don't really know what it's going to do.
Can it swim? Although if it survived in a crate that long without food and in a really stuffy spot, one could assume it might have be able to survive underwater. Who knows?
Yeah. I like that detail. It's like, it put the crate back under the stairs where it felt safe. Did it know it was under the stairs? Because I get the sense that this animal's view of things is, I'm bumming along in the Arctic or whatever. Now I'm in a box. 140 years go by, and now I'm in college. The monsters in this movie are all vaguely supernatural. The zombies have ghost powers. This thing appears to be a flesh and blood creature but can survive without eating.
Well, there's also the question, is this the first time it's been out of the box?
Oh, yeah.
It had to end up in that crawl space somehow.
Yeah.
The one other thing I'll notice, and this is where a little bit more social commentary creeps in, at least in the original story that's not in the film itself, is there was this parallel drawn between the creature, this fearsome monster, and Wilma. The idea that one will kill you quickly, one will kill you slowly, but they'll both kill you in the end, so you might as well pit them against each other.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the last story. They're Creeping Up on You, which, again, only features two people, at least on screen.
Yep.
E.G. Marshall, of course, from The Defenders, 12 Angry Men. A lot of people remember him from Christmas Vacation, playing the incredibly nasty Upson Pratt. Again, he's terrible, but he has so much fun in the part that it's almost a little contagious.
Mm-hmm.
I always just associate him with his amazing delivery of the word bastards.
Yeah.
He says it like a dozen times, and every time it has this great hiss to it, that's this sting that's fantastic. The awful thing where he's the guy, he just took over his company, committed suicide, he's talking to his widow, and he starts miming the violin thing as he's talking to her with his grin on his face.
George Genron told me old Norman went out with a bang.
How many men have you destroyed? How many men have you killed, you monster?
Only the stupid ones. Only the ones who handed me a knife and then stretched out their throats. Only the ones who, if you'll pardon the expression, fucked up.
Again, it's awful, but it's kind of grimly funny the way he does it.
Yeah, this is a bad guy with a lot of personality. And this is probably closer to the way EC would usually go with their bad characters. In this one, it's just a story about a really bad dude, and he gets what's coming to him.
Yep.
And it's a great villain performance. It feels like you could take the Roaches out and this would still be a story worth telling.
Yeah.
Because he's just a bastard, but he's a compelling bastard, and, get the environmental storytelling. You go back to, you have, yes, the white room is there so we can see the cockroaches. Okay. But it fits with the character.
Yeah.
It fits in the unsubtle way of, just so we're clear, this is all about whiteness getting what's coming to it.
Well, there's also a lot of the Howard Hughes quality to it.
Right,
He's a total germaphobe, but he keeps wearing these gloves and destroying them down his little funnel thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, they actually did film it with a really beautiful-looking, wood-paneled, carpeted apartment. They filmed part of it and realized it wouldn't work because they'd released a couple bugs, and they're like, where are the bugs?
Yeah.
Gone. So...
Cockroaches spent a whole lot of time evolving for exactly that situation.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you see a lot of roaches in this, that's like the first 5 seconds after they drop them, and then they're just gone.
Yeah.
They had to get it really quickly. This story seems to sort of exemplify King's theory of horror, where it's like he tries for terror. If he fails for that, he goes for horror. If he fails for that, he goes for the gross out. This is definitely the gross out.
Yeah.
It's like, if you can't be creative, throw some bugs on screen, some kind of creature, some creepy crawly, and it's going to freak people out. It worked for Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Yep.
It works here. The whole segment was actually almost left out because of budgetary concerns, because they were running out of money, and originally King, as a sort of a backup, he had written The Hitchhiker Story, the one that eventually would end up in Creepshow 2. So if they had run out of money, we might have seen that in this movie, and frankly, probably done a little bit better than it was in Creepshow 2.
Now, you need to end on this one. This is the one that's appropriate to end on. It's thematic. If we are going back around into the wraparound story, it's, it makes sense that we begin and end with stories about bad patriarchal figures. Even though E.G. Marshall in this is not, Pratt doesn't seem to have a family. God, I hope not. But if he's a germaphobe, this is probably not someone who spent a lot of time with other people. That seems to be like the running theme of this. And, they allude to it when he starts narrating his own backstory.
See, Mrs. Katzenmeyer, I grew up in Hell's Kitchen. Bugs everywhere. I know what to do with a bug when I see it. Spray it. Squash it. Kill it.
And it's the perfect backstory for a guy like this, of a guy who is not only this much of a bastard, but probably feels justified in it.
Exactly. It's a dog-eat-dog world. It's predators and prey, and he's going to be the top apex predator.
I had it bad, so it's okay that I'm like this. This is, not to get told, well, this is the Donald Trump story. This is every one of those guys who has that backstory of, I was a working-class kid from Jersey, and my dad worked his fingers to the bone, and, and I knew that I was going to be successful, so I screwed a whole bunch of people in business, and now I have the big house, and they feel completely justified in some kind of Horatio Alger, capitalist consumer Calvinism thing.
Yeah, I fought for every bit of this, and therefore it's okay if I squash anybody I need to keep going.
Right, and and he literally says so. The guy that I just screwed out of his business, look, if he'd been better at his business and deserved it more, I wouldn't have been able to. It's that attaching moral value to currency thing. He's also a racist, just in case we couldn't infer that anyway. From everything else, it's like, oh well, yeah, I'm so fucking shocked that this guy's not fond of his black landlord. What do you know?
And coming up to that character, it's David Early, who played the talk show host at the beginning of Dawn of the Dead.
Nice.
Doesn't have a huge part, but I love that when he talks to Pratt, he's giving the exaggerated sort of black caricature.
Yeah.
Because he knows this is how he has to relate to this guy.
Yeah.
This is what this guy expects, therefore I'll play into it. and humor him just to shut him up.
This seems like a pretty nice building, so this is probably not the only dick he deals with every fucking day in this building, you know, and you can't tell them to fuck themselves to their face, so you might as well do some of this stuff.
Yeah, and suddenly you can hear when he's on the phone again, when he's trapped in the elevator in the last scene, that he drops that affect from his voice, so it's clearly is an affect that he adopts just for this guy.
Right.
Interestingly, almost cast in the part of Upson Pratt was Max von Sydow, supposedly. They tried to get him. I don't know if that would have worked as well.
No, too respectable.
I think that might be part of it. Something about von Sydow, even after seeing him play villains, he just seems very warm and kind of avuncular. He seems like a nice guy. And I'm sure E.G. Marshall was too, but he's really good at playing the cold-blooded bastard.
Well, I'll admit I'm not 100% familiar with E.G. Marshall's biography, but he seems like someone who probably did really come from, you know, like a regular background and seems like a real guy and can probably give the asshole version of that.
This guy, it seems like he's, at heart, without the money, he's just this grubby little man. And you need somebody who can play that
This is short man syndrome.
Yeah.
This is a guy who still sees everything as something he needs revenge on, you know.
For the roaches, they had guys go into a cave filled with bat guano, turn out the lights, turn it back on once there were tons of roaches, box them all up, and bring them in, and didn't really account for all of them after the filming. So supposedly they infested the location that they filmed this in, the building.
Well, that's good to know. Do we know where that building is? Because I want to not go there ever. That's good.
Yeah.
That's great.
Supposedly for the last shot, the effect of them coming out of his stomach, they couldn't figure out how to do it, how to get the roaches out there. That's actually just flesh-colored toilet paper. And once it got wet with the fake blood, the roaches were able to tear their way right out of it and erupt. Let's talk about some of common themes that go through the whole movie. There is a definite class theme. It's notable that 3 of the stories, the victims of this gruesome justice, are wealthy. Certainly in Father's Day, Leslie Nielsen's character in the Tide one, and E.G. Marshall. And in the other one, there's at least sort of a negative connotation to mercenary ideas. Like even in the Jordy Verrill one, his first thought when he sees this meteorite is he's going to get money for it. In The Crate, the characters are at least well-to-do, and it's notable that right before she dies, one of the things that Wilma screams is that Henry is no good at making money.
Yeah.
And that's right before she gets eaten. If you're out for money, that's not a good attitude to have. You're going to get it somehow.
Yeah.
And in the Tide one, the 2 people that we sympathize with, Ted Danson and Galen Ross, Danson even comments that the Ross character doesn't want any money from Leslie Nielsen. She just wants to walk away.
Yeah. It's not a direct through line, but it's there.
Yeah.
It's, you know, this is America. Everything's about class. It's always it's the quickest way to establish what these people's relation are to one another, our age or social standing.
And it goes back to what you were saying about the first story, where somebody from, like Romero, who's kind of from a working class background, of course he's going to see entertainment and seeing rich people kind of get it.
It's like Caddyshack, where you can tell that the people making this movie are intimately familiar with these people, but they were not them. They were the other people in the movie who had to put up with their shit.
Okay, now I'm imagining a Creepshow segment with Ted Knight being chased by a killer gopher.
That would be awesome.
That would be awesome. There's also a theme of family relationships. I mean, a lot of this is weird family dynamics gone wrong. The Father's Day one, obviously, Jordy and his father. Both Tide and Crate have characters disposing of their spouses in grim ways. Let's move on to some miscellaneous trivia. There's, of course, the ashtray, the fateful ashtray from Father's Day that Bedelia actually kills her father with. Pops up in all of the segments. I can find it in 4 and the wraparound story. I can't find it in Jordy Verrill. I don't know. Supposedly it was cut out of one of them. I've heard it's supposed to be on the professor's desk next to his cash box, but I didn't see it. You can see it in the Tide one. It's on Leslie Nielsen's bedstand right there.
Yeah.
In the E.G. Marshall one, it's his soap dish.
Yep.
And in the Crate, you can see it when Hal Holbrook is writing out the note.
Yep.
And in the final story, it's in the background on the desk when Joe King is stabbing the voodoo doll.
You see, that bothers me more that the kid already has an ashtray at that age than that he's been able to read the horror comic or has a voodoo doll.
I just realized that in that story, when the comic is being taken away, he's already sent for the voodoo doll, so he already had this planned.
Yeah, this is a long time coming.
Yeah. The prop comic for the movie was actually drawn by former EC Comics artist Jack Kamen, so they went to the source to make sure it looked right.
Well, good.
Let's move on to the legacy of the movie. Of course, the movie inspired a sequel, as we mentioned, directed by Michael Gornick and written by George Romero, adapting a couple more Stephen King stories. And yeah, it's not as effective. The Raft one, despite some dodgy acting, I think is actually legitimately creepy.
Yeah, I think that's the good one. That's the good one in Creepshow, too.
Yeah, because that is, again, based on a really good story that King wrote. The Chief Woodenhead one is pretty weak. And The Hitchhiker, I think, could be good, but it just doesn't work in that the way it's directed in that one.
Yeah, it's it's the wrong story for that.
I also think there's a little too much animation in that. The whole wraparound story is animated, and I think it gives it a weird vibe. The use of animation here between segments, I think, is just enough.
Yeah, I can go with that. Like, it's not awful, but it's not, you can't fake having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first one feels like, people sitting down like, oh man, I can't believe we're getting away with this. Look at what we're doing. We're going to use intertitles. Yeah. And, the second one looks like, okay, we have to do... It's like an imitation of someone having a good time,
It doesn't help that Lois Chiles and George Kennedy are really the only notable cast members, and
yeah,
a lot of the acting just isn't quite up to par. I mean, that's another first for Romero here. He's actually working with name actors.
Yeah.
Which, up to this point, he really hadn't. Even Night Riders with Ed Harris. Ed Harris wasn't really anybody when he worked with him in that one.
Right.
And here he's finally working with some notable people. So.
Yeah. We don't need to talk about Creepshow 3, right?
No, I don't think so. We'll talk about what the creators consider the real Creepshow 3 in a second, but
yeah,
this also inspired the television program Tales from the Dark Side, which was pretty much going to be the Creepshow, the TV program,
right,
and kind of became that. And its movie spin-off, which Savini considers to be really the genuine Creepshow 3.
Mm.
Unofficially, that is what Creepshow 3 should have been. But yeah, Laurel Entertainment's intellectual properties were brought up by Taurus Entertainment, and they produced Creepshow 3, which is just... bleh, along with that really terrible Day of the Dead remake, which is unwatchable.
Awful.
And they're talking about doing more with that, too. The crate from the fourth story actually pops up in other places. It popped up in Jason Goes to Hell in the basement.
Yep.
And for a split second, if you watch closely, it pops up in Terminus in The Walking Dead from last season. In the season opener of that one, the characters run right by it.
Oh, nice.
With a chain and the padlock just slightly open. And a bit of John Harrison's score is, of course, also used in the Thanksgiving trailer from Grindhouse. Okay, what's your favorite scene from the movie?
It might be the first look we get at Fluffy, because it's so... He's really the only monster that's not a zombie that we see, and, again, watching it as a kid, that's what I'm waiting for.
It looks like a couple of emeralds.
The fact that it's all teeth is just so cool, and it's just like, yeah, that's really something.
For me, I think it has to be the long section where Hal Holbrook feeds Wilma to the monster.
Mm.
From the moment she comes down and he can't keep a straight face, we think he's freaking out, and it turns out, no, he's giggling because he knows what's coming, and he just can't, he's like an eager little kid, he can't wait for this to happen.
It's easier if you just see for yourself, Wilma.
What are you laughing about? Your best friend gets in a scrape with a girl and you're laughing?
Well, there's a funny side to it, Wilma. Wait till you see. You'll think so yourself.
You're hysterical, Henry. It's just what I would have expected.
No, I don't think you'll expect this, Wilma. No, this is going to be an entirely new experience.
And then finally he just can't wait and grabs her and flings her under there and is smacking her against it. And there's that moment where it doesn't come out and there's this heartbreak on his face, like he suddenly realized, I'm an idiot to believe that this actually could have worked. And maybe it's occurring to him, oh, maybe Dexter just murdered a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And I wanted to believe this whole monster story because I really wanted to get rid of her.
Yeah.
And of course the turnaround that then we have a whole scene of her abusing him. And that last jump of Fluffy coming out, we get the crazy comic book framing on Adrienne Barbeau. And that last, tell it to call you Billy. And he has to run to the window and throw up.
Yeah.
That it's this final victorious moment, and he's bending it sick out the window.
Yeah.
Okay, what are your recommendations? If somebody likes this one, which I sincerely hope they would, what else do you think they'd like?
Unfortunately, I feel like the anthology thing is something that was really popular to try for a while, and almost none of them worked. This didn't make money, right? This
made money, actually.
This did decent?
This was a decent hit, yeah.
Incidentally, the detail that this was out at the same time as White Dog is really amusing to me, because White Dog feels like it could have been a segment of this, at least not in execution, but in premise, it kind of feels like it's like, yeah, that would be an EC comic story.
Yeah.
The dog only kills black people. Okay, that's
that character is, that's somebody's getting a comeuppance after that one.
That makes sense. I would say Tales from the Dark Side, which is the one that people call the third Creepshow.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically Creepshow 3. It just doesn't have the comic book wraparound anymore.
Yeah.
That one is a lot of fun. Last segment kind of doesn't work, but still good monster. The Amicus Tales from the Crypt, obviously, good stuff.
I love that one. That's still really creepy and effective. Yep.
Yeah, old school. The Tales from the Crypt series, of course, had its ups and downs. It was one of those early HBO shows that was just really too happy that it was on HBO.
First 3 seasons or so are really solid, I think.
Yeah, and they have some winners after that, but it very quickly got into the, holy shit, we can show tits, and holy shit, we can have violence, and then that's good for three seasons, and then it gets into, holy shit, we can hire Arnold Schwarzenegger.
There's a point where you can see they can't get the directors they were anymore, and they can't get the actors they were anymore, and they start to run out of gas.
Last season, whichever season was the one that was in England, where they use all British actors and British directors,
I've never seen any of that season.
and all the ones that was pretty good.
Really?
And
I gotta check that out.
They once they knew it was over, they started to get very, very creative. But then I'm the outlier. I like the Crypt Keeper better once he was funny. But they're Trick or Treat, the only good modern anthology one of these.
And in a really different in that it doesn't have a wraparound structure. It's almost more of a Robert Altman horror movie that you have all these characters bouncing off each other. Yeah. It's really good. I would throw in a couple specific Romero ones. Two Evil Eyes, which is one of the ones that's not very well known. This kills me. It was going to be a Showtime show. It was going to be horror directors adapting stories from Poe. And so the movie is actually 2 of them. You have Romero doing M. Valdemar and then Dario Argento doing The Black Cat. What kills me is the next episode they never produced before they decided to just turn those 2 into a movie was going to be Richard Stanley doing The Cask of Amontillado with Jonathan Pryce and Michael Gambon. Oh, what I would have given to see that.
Oh, yeah.
That would have been amazing. But the Romero segment feels very much in line with this. It even has a lot of the same cast in it. Adrienne Barbeau pops up in that one. E.G. Marshall. Yep. There's a little shout out to Upson Pratt in there, hidden in.
Nice.
Tom Atkins, a lot of the same cast. I'd go with The Dark Half, the other time that Romero got to do a King property, and I really feel like it's underappreciated. Timothy Hutton's great in it. It's a gorgeous-looking movie. It really captures that kind of autumnal feel. It's just very solid, despite all the difficulties it had. And it's not an anthology movie, but I think it really captures the crazy tone of this one, is Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell. That movie is just so much fun from start to finish. And boy, it keeps you jumping.
Yeah. Drag Me to Hell is weird because he has total control of that one, and he's doing it, but it feels very much like something that would have happened really early in his career. Where,
it does,
where someone, a studio, would have come to him and said, okay, we have a horror script about a woman who gets cursed by a gypsy. We want you to do this, and he has to follow that script, but whenever it's time for a monster gag, okay, here's a ghost, and then, that's a Sam Raimi ghost.
Yep.
There we go.
And it's fine to look at it in that kind of EC moral code thing, where, again, you have a character who does something that's not entirely nice, but really doesn't deserve what she gets.
Yeah.
Anything else to say about Creepshow?
Watch it. Again, if you're listening, you've probably seen this, but if you haven't, please see it. We've spoiled the movie for you, fine, but, I promise it's still good.
It still works. And I'll say, after discussing it fully, I'm still afraid of the goddamn thing.
There's a monkey.
That ends our conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about Creepshow or feel that we missed something, check out the comment section of this episode on CinemaSpection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to CinemaSpection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Our show is available on iTunes and Stitcher, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe to us. And if you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review there. We appreciate any feedback you can offer, and your reviews improve our visibility. We'll be back to discussing the movie next time. Until then, remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than just what's on the screen. The director of the director of photography.
I need a whole supercut of just that.